Hello, McFluffy52 here, and today I want to give you a Magic Timmy's top 5 mythics from March of the Machines. Now, here are my top 5 from March of the Machines, not in any particular order. We'll be going through each of them individually, and then we'll have my rankings at the end. So, starting off, let's go ahead and talk about Borborygmos and Fblthp. This is 5 mana in Temur colors for a 6/5. Whenever Borborygmos and Fblthp enter the battlefield or attacks, draw a card, then you may discard any number of land cards. When you discard one or more cards this way, Borborygmos and Fblthp deals twice that much damage to target creature. So for me, this card is amazing. It seems awesome because it does something when it enters the battlefield. You draw a card, so it sort of replaces itself. You can kind of think of it as like a 5 mana, 6/5 Spirited Companion with other very serious upsides. So you play this, you draw a card, you replace the card in your hand. Well, now whenever you attack, you can also draw a card. And then whenever you draw a card, you can also discard your lands and ping down the opponent's like creatures. So it just seems like awesome value for a pretty cool card. I think what stands out the most to me is honestly the art is just being so adorable. You get Fblthp on top of Borborygmos. So this card definitely deserves a spot in my top 5 mythics. I think it's going to be super like valuable, just like good to play out wherever you are. You can go ahead and try and remove something, or you just draw into more answers. It's a good body. And I think it will fit well into these colors, like messing around with lands. Maybe you can play lands back from your graveyard, or you're drawing into like burn spell to also like double link up the fact you discarded a land. I think Borborygmos and Fblthp is just nice value. Now, talking about the second card we have is Kroxa and Kunoros. This card is a 6 mana, 6/6 Elder Giant Dog. Now, its Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile 5 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, to me, this card seems like a great card for Reanimator. Saffron Olive from MTG Goldfish is super high on this card because, unlike the other cards like Invoke Justice, Cruelty of Gix, this card still does something when you have no creatures in your graveyard. So say your opponent ends up shutting down your graveyard, you still get this 6/6 Vigilance, Menace, Lifelink body to go ahead and swing in, block, do whatever you need to do. It's also super cool that it has the reanimation here as an enter the battlefield and an attack trigger, because that means you can play this out and still get your reanimation trigger even if your opponent goes ahead and removes this in response to it. Also, I will say, like, exiling 5 cards from your graveyard is kind of difficult here, because there is just Graveyard Trespasser running around. But March of the Machines introduce some other cards here that will mill both you and your opponent. I talked about those in my full set review, which will probably be at the end of the video. You can hop over and one of the boxes or whatever. But Kroxa and Kunoros, I think it's not going to be nearly as hard as like to exile 5 cards from your graveyard, just because there's other ways to fill your graveyard. You might need mass like rummaging or discard effects, like Elder Dragon War is a very good example. You can discard as many cards as you want from your hand and then draw that number of cards. I think those sort of cards will work well with Kroxa and Kunoros because you just flood your graveyard with stuff, and then hopefully you'll be able to hit one of them. You do need 6 cards in your graveyard, and it is 6 mana for reanimation, but you do get an awesome body. So that's why I'm excited to see Kroxa and Kunoros from March of Machines. Now, Urabrask in the Great Work is a very fun and probably one of the coolest Praetors from the set. 4 mana for a 4/4 with First Strike. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. Add a red. So this first ability here is very similar to like you get like a Bergi God of Storytelling where you get a red mana for whenever you cast a spell. This is restricted to instant and sorceries, but you also get a sort of like grape shot effect where whenever you cast a spell, you get to do 1 damage to your opponent. So this is should be a ton of fun to play if you can sling together a bunch of spells. Think of like Ancestral Anger, Thrill of Possibility, or Big Score, where you're you're drawing cards while also getting like this kind of discount on your draw. So like Ancestral Anger, the one red that you generate will pay for itself. Thrill of Possibility is only 1 mana. Big Score, you draw to create 2 treasure tokens, so it ends up only costing you like 1 mana. So together, I think it will be really fun to play, and I also think this card can play well in like mono red, where you're just pinging your opponent whenever you cast like a lightning strike or a play with fire or end the festivities. So I think this card still gets value in other decks, and I think even if you're not trying to combo off with it, I think it could stand a spot with like Monastery Mentor, Third Path Iconoclast, and sort of a Jeskai Spellslinger deck. Also, Urabrask is one of the easiest paraders to flip in terms of mana cost because it only costs 1 red. Now you have to cast 3 or more instant or sorcery spells that turn to flip it, but if you've ever played against Arclight Phoenix, this isn't too crazy impossible to do, especially if you're playing a bunch of spells that'll draw cards, I think. Uh, if you flip it, you get the Great Work, and the Great Work deals 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control. So it's a sort of one-sided Brotherhood's End, which we know how good Brotherhood's End is. It's pretty good at cleaning up those aggro boards. Again, though, problem with Urabrask, it is 4 mana, so you're gonna have to try and sling together a bunch of spells after you probably cast a fair amount of things. But it's still not that bad. 3 damage, one-sided board sweep. Second chapter, you go ahead and create 3 treasure tokens, which are important because the third chapter says, until end of turn, you may cast instant and sorcery spells from any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead, exile the Great Work, and return it to the battlefield front face up. So you go ahead and get Urabrask back, so you get this discount whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, but now you can cast spells from your graveyard as well as your opponent's graveyard. The treasure tokens are important because if your opponent is a different color than red, you're going to need, or a different color than the colors you're playing, you're going to need those treasure tokens to go ahead and pay for that black mana to cast their Go for the Throat at their Shieldred's face. So do think it'll be a ton of fun though if you can flip it. I don't think it will be that crazy hard to flip, and you kind of get to combo off on the third one because you get this extra mana while also being able to play spells from the graveyard. So if you have like draw spells in your graveyard, and then you draw into more draw spells in your hand, and you cast those draw spells and they go into your graveyard, you can cast them again. So I think Urabrask will be a ton of fun to play in that regard, but we'll have to see when the set comes out. Vorinclex is the next mythic on my list. Also a Praetor here, 5 mana for a 6/6 with Trample and Reach. I think Reach here is super good because there's a bunch of cards coming from March of the Machine, which I talk about again in that set review, and I'll also probably mention some of them in my other videos here. I'm going to be doing my Praetor rankings, top mythics, top rares, and top uncommons and commons from the set, but there are some pretty nice flyers, such as, well, there's Archangel Elspeth, which can send any creature flying. There's also Zephyr Singer, which can give any creature that convokes it flying. So there's going to be creatures in the air that you're going to want to block, and Vorinclex can offer that blocking for you while also being a pretty good card besides that, because when it enters the battlefield, you go ahead and search up 2 forest cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, and then shuffle. So it's important to note it doesn't say basic force, so you can get yourself some Triomes if you're playing a multicolored deck. And the nice thing about grabbing Triomes is you could also just cycle them away, go ahead and draw more cards. So kind of pseudo card advantage with Vorinclex. You thin out your deck, so hopefully you draw into something nice, or you just kind of grab yourself Triomes and maybe you cycle them away and draw. But those lands also can help you flip Vorinclex, because Vorinclex is one of the simplest to flip because it's only just a bunch of mana. You only have to pay 8 mana, and then you can go ahead, flip it into the Grand Evolution. So Grand Evolution, the first chapter, mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from the milled cards onto the battlefield. And then second chapter, distribute 7+1/+1 counters among any number of creature or target creatures you control. And then third chapter, until end of turn, creatures you control gain 1 generic mana. This creature fights target creature you don't control. Exile the Grand Evolution, then return it to the battlefield front face up. So this is super cool and super fun. I am a little worried though that first chapter there might whiff, so you're gonna want to try and stuff your deck with some other creatures that you want to hit, like Defiler of Vigor, for instance, if you're playing mono green. Now, I will also say that like this card is kind of competing with Defiler of Vigor, which is a bit uh, a nice high value card if you can get it out and get it to stick around. But I think the reach and the other effects of this card can potentially bump it up as pretty good to be playing. Because you can also just potentially get two free creatures if you flip it. It also is, I will mention the first chapter here, Mill 10 could be a bit of problematic in standard if there is, if it remains as grindy as it is, because you mill 10 cards, maybe those 10 cards keep you from decking out, and if you mill 10 cards and you only get 2 mana dorks, that would feel pretty bad. So again, you're going to want to stick a bunch of other fun creatures to play with Vorinclex. But yeah, and then the last chapter is honestly one of my favorites because you kind of turn the board into Fight Club. You kind of punch down all of your opponent's creatures for a little bit of mana, and then you can go ahead and swing through it and finish out the game. So I think this card is super cool. It does suffer from one kind of problem, is that green is a little weak in standard right now. Probably the worst color, but I think Vorinclex should be a ton of fun, and I think one card that will make Vorinclex also a ton of fun is Storm the Festival, which is 6 mana. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 2 5 mana value cards or less from among them onto the battlefield. So if you put Vorinclex down there as one of your cards, you can go ahead and tier up 2 forests that will help you to slowly uh, get up to recasting Storm the Festival from your graveyard with Flashback, which seems like a lot of fun. So if you play like Vorinclex and Defiler Vigor and you play like Storm the Festival, then you're going to be able to potentially get Vorinclex and Defiler Vigor out there all in one go. But yeah, I do really think Trample Reach 6/6 5 is not that bad, and then you get this really cool kind of backside where you just kind of build up a cool board to try and beat your opponent down with. Now, next up we have Zurgo and Ojutai, the last card from the list. It's a 5 mana 4/4 dragon with flying haste. When it entered, or it has hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. Whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player or battle, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You may return one of those dragons to its owner's hand. So the way this works is you can play it out, haste it in, it has hexproof. You get to look at the top 3 cards, pick out your best card, and then you can bounce it back to your hand. Now, why would you want to bounce it back to your hand? Well, if your opponent's playing a bunch of like sweepers, control-y, and you need to guarantee that you have a creature alive, you don't want to like leave this on the battlefield to have it lose hexproof and the opponent removes it. So I think Zurgo and Ojutai is really strong for that reason, is that you can kind of just keep hasting it out and picking it up. Do I think you actually want to be picking it up most of the time? Probably not, but if you're against an opponent that is probably going to cause you problems, Zurgo and Ojutai is a really nice top deck where you just kind of keep sending it out there and it keeps finding you another card to keep up with your opponent. So I think Zurgo and Ojutai should be a ton of fun as just a nice flying leader, has haste, it protects itself so you don't get to see your creature just die the instant you play it, and you get to keep drawing cards. Like picking out your best card from the top 3 is amazing, because then you can plan out your next turn for something even more fun and even more amazing. So, getting into the card rankings, here's my rankings for the top 5 mythics that I've talked about here. We have Borborygmos and Fblthp. I put this as first because I think it's just such good value, getting able to draw a card instantly, replace it, maybe ping something down, and then there's just good body for 5. Borborygmos also technically, or like Borborygmos and Fblthp also technically works with fight rigging, which would be pretty fun because it has 6 power. You put 1 more counter on it, you get a free spell off your fight rigging. So Borborygmos and Fblthp standing as number 1 here. Vorinclex and the Grand Evolution is number 2. I think it stands as a really strong beater card if you can get it out there and get it to stick around for a bit, and then you flip it and build yourself this awesome board. I do think it has weaknesses, but I do think it will be a ton of fun to play. Zurgo and Ojutai is number 3 as a nice dragon, keeps finding you cards, keeps letting you do fun things turn after turn. Now 4, Kroxa and Kunoros. I think this will be a really fun reanimation thing, and even if your reanimation gets shut down, you get this nice creature. It is 6 mana for reanimation, but you get this 6/6. Again, could work with fight rigging, but I don't know if you want to work in another color. But yeah, ton of fun. And then lastly, Urabrask and the Great Work is 5 here. We'll have to see how this card plays out, but if it plays as good as I'm hoping, it will be a ton of fun and could easily jump up as my favorite mythic from the set. But yeah, if you're interested in more cards from the set, what are my thoughts on the Praetors, the top rares, the top uncommons and commons, consider subscribing because I'll be releasing videos here shortly on those topics. And also consider checking out this video here, which should be my set review for March of the Machines, where I go into depth about all the cards, the themes of the set, and all that jazz. So consider checking it out. I have timestamps in the description so you can hop to whatever is most interesting. Have a nice morning, evening, night, afternoon, wherever and whenever you're watching. Ciao.